be sure everyone can hear well when we use this and give our speakers a chance to use it. Okay, good. So, welcome. Dr. Shamir Wilson is an assistant professor in the College of Information Sciences and Technology at Penn State. We won't hold that against him. He received bachelor's degrees in computer science, mathematics, and philosophy from Virginia Tech in 2005. And that's, I found out from talking with him, that wasn't a triple major, it was 3 degrees. After graduating from here in 2005, he received a PhD in computer science from the University of Maryland in 2011. After his PhD, he held a postdoc position at Carnegie Mellon in computer science, and then spent 2 years as an assistant professor at the University of Cincinnati in electrical engineering and computer science. Dr. Wilson's research interests span natural language processing, internet privacy, and artificial intelligence. He's director of the Human Language Technologies Lab at Penn State and a member of the Usable Privacy Project, Usable Privacy Policy Project. It's common for our majors to be double majors, combining philosophy with other fields such as political science, psychology, or computer science, but every few years we have a brave soul who tries a triple major, or in this case, a triple degree. Shamir combines philosophy, computer science, and mathematics, and this has given real substance to his interdisciplinary work. For example, I noticed on his Vita that recently Shamir gave a week of lectures on artificial intelligence ethics at a university in Egypt. I know Shamir from a seminar he took from me in 2004, and he so impressed our faculty that we awarded the William H. Williams Prize to Shamir in philosophy when he graduated. He was deeply involved in the honors program here at Virginia Tech, and when its late director, Jack Dudley, passed away recently, Shamir was on campus for the memorial service. Please help me welcome a true Hokie and a true philosopher who takes his philosophy training with him out into the world, Shamir Wilson.
Bear with me just a minute. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Jim, for the introduction. Graduates, how are you doing? Yeah. So, this isn't the 8 a.m. engineering graduation enthusiasm. How are you folks doing? I hope you're doing well, because congratulations, as I'm sure you've heard before a few times, you've actually made it. You took classes. You navigated degree requirements. Some of you wrote a thesis. The registrar said you could graduate, so you picked up a cap and a gown from the bookstore or a friend, or maybe eBay. And right now you've got a tassel on that cap. Word of advice, pay very close attention to the instructions for that tassel. You're supposed to turn it a certain way. If you turn it the other way, it's like an undo button. That's a degree. Don't do that, you gotta start all over. Right, but here's another documented feature, you're gonna like this one. If you turn it the correct direction, and you keep turning all the way around past the full circle, you get extra degrees. No one knows where they come from. Some people hear a strange grinding noise, but you can just ignore that. Only one tassel has ever burst into flames from someone turning it too far. And this procedure, by the way, this is how I got 3 bachelor's degrees, and then the university stopped me from turning it any further. I did get 3 degrees 14 years ago when I graduated from Virginia Tech. I think a lot of graduation speakers say it feels like just yesterday, but it doesn't feel like that to me. It feels like exactly 1.4 decades. Between now and then, a lot of things happened. I earned a master's degree, and then I got a PhD. My college girlfriend is sitting up there. We stayed together through 6 years of long-distance relationship, and then we finally found a way to live in the same place. Shortly after that, we got married. I worked at 4 different universities, held visiting positions at 3 more, altogether covering 4 different continents. So I also visited 36 countries and somehow took exactly 250 commercial flights. I calculated I spent roughly 700 hours or about 1 month on board planes. And in case this sounds glamorous, I'll take some of the luster off of it. The vast majority of those hours were in economy class. This kind of information doesn't go far in a graduation speech, though. All of that sounds like results. And when I thought about what I should tell you today, I thought I should talk about process. I should spend time on struggle, failure, and endurance. In particular, I've accumulated a lot of failure. You can imagine a collection of it shaped like a pile of gravel, or maybe like a pyramid, covered with a carefully distributed outer layer of success. As some examples, many of those flights I mentioned, they were actually to interview for jobs I ultimately did not get. Also, my first job that wasn't temporary, that began just 3 years ago, which is 5 years after I finished my PhD, or 11 years after I graduated from Virginia Tech. And that delay wasn't entirely from lack of trying. So I thought jobs might be on your mind. I thought I'd talk about them some more. But wait, you might be thinking, he's a computer scientist. What could he possibly tell philosophy graduates about the difficulties of getting a job? Offers are supposed to just rain down on them. Well, got the special skill. I can make a problem like finding a job as a computer scientist arbitrarily difficult. The skill is composed of several sub-skills. Getting a PhD, changing my research focus during the PhD, changing my research focus after the PhD, wanting to travel, wanting to live in specific places, and being unreasonably picky about where and how I spent my time. Sometimes I wonder, in the abstract, what makes us want the most difficult things? It's a hard question. I don't have a good answer, but I can tell you what it's like to want something, to spend years working on it, and then finally to reflect on having reached a goal. I did an inventory recently of all the fellowships, internships, postdocs, industry jobs, government jobs, and professorships that I applied to over the past decade. My records are sparse in a few places, but the number's somewhere between 300 and 350. About 2/3 of those applications were passed over in silence, and I never heard back anything. The next largest quantity were those that were rejected, though sometimes it took a very long time. In fact, I once got a rejection email 430 days after the submission deadline had passed. I'm glad I wasn't waiting. One time, I got a rejection email for a position I didn't even apply for. It was a faculty position in water resources management. I would have rejected it too. A tiny number of applications resulted in interviews, and these spanned positions in academia, industry, and government, but regardless, the stakes were high. The interviews were the part of this process that I remember the most, and some interesting things happened. I'll list 10 of them for you, touching on each of them just briefly, and these are in no particular order. Number 1, there was that time I gave a job talk that was so well received, the applause was thunderous, and someone in the audience cheered, but I received no offer. Number 2, there were all the times I was asked illegal questions during interviews, including the time someone told me he knew he wasn't supposed to ask, but he decided to ask anyway. Those of you going into management, remember to remind your employees not to do illegal things. Number 3, there was that time during the job talk QA, question and answering, at a research lab when someone angrily demanded, I'll quote them, quote, "Name one thing your research is useful for besides helping people." I knew then that it wasn't the right place for me. Number 4, there's the time someone held up a printed copy of one of my publications, he pointed at it, and he complained to me emphatically, quote, "This isn't interesting." unquote. I explained that I disagreed. He remained dissatisfied, and then his institution sent me an offer. For other reasons, I did reject it, though. Number 5, there was that time at a university when I asked a room full of students what they liked most about their department, and their answer was several seconds of uncomfortable silence. Eventually, one of them spoke up to say that if I joined the department, it would be better. Number 6, there was that time my flight to an interview aborted its landing twice and was diverted to a different airport. But meanwhile, my seatmate and I had a great conversation. She was also on her way to interview for a faculty position, a different one, and we're both photographers. 3 years later, we still talk sometimes. Number 7, there was that time just after I finished my PhD when I interviewed with a startup whose core product seemed a little bit too far-fetched. I had no other offers when they sent me one, and reluctantly I turned theirs down. Years later, I looked them up. I discovered that their website was a ghost town. Their core product had been relegated to Kickstarter, where its campaign had been canceled, having reached just 2% of its funding goal. Number 8, there was that time I interviewed for a faculty position, and a professor told me the department's average class size was 60, that's 60. They were aiming for even larger. Number 9, there was that time an interviewer spoke so much, I didn't think I'd be able to say anything, so I tried to cut in. He raised his volume to talk over me and continued speaking much louder for the next minute. The opportunity to say something never came. Number 10, finally, there was the time I checked out of my interview hotel while a woman stood nearby with 2 beautifully groomed ponies in the lobby. It seemed like a good omen. Still no offer. This is a mixed bag of experiences as they happened. Some were pleasant, some I could have done without, some I still don't have a verdict on. Regardless, I look back on them now as stories that I can tell other people, and maybe you can find some value in them. You might encounter some of these when you interview, but probably not all of them. You can know that you're not alone. Your reactions of fear, anger, or amusement, they don't make you a strange person. You're following well-worn paths, although your footsteps are unique and your experiences are yours alone. This brings us to the part of the graduation speech where I'm supposed to offer advice. It's unlikely you're going to remember any of this, but if I leave a positive impression, a gestalt of advice, I think I've accomplished my task. My first piece of advice for you is to discover your career limits, both to press at them and to take care of yourself. Being unreasonable is sometimes portrayed as a virtue. There are these rose-tinted stories about artists who don't compromise or leaders who demand perfection. In reality, this is actually a double-edged sword. Being unreasonable can drive you towards your goals, but you've got to keep an eye on the toll it takes on yourself. Being unreasonable helped me with key decisions, sometimes key moments, but occasionally I was close enough to the edge to be able to see the other side. Finding out how much you can handle, how long you're willing to persist is difficult, but the knowledge is valuable. And when you discover your limits, you regret less. In the long run, you accomplish more. My second piece of advice is to extract valuable things from failure. This is, by the way, the kind of advice I used to understand in theory, but not in practice. So maybe save this one for later, reconsider it from time to time. There are useful things you get from failure you don't get from anything else. Not from success and not from inaction. Baseline result is the practical knowledge you get for the next try. But of greater value, failure is the raw material for the character trait that we call grit, and for the discovery of one's creative voice. For example, I hear the value of my own failures sometimes when I speak. They steady my words like ballast and ship. My third piece of advice is to develop friendships that sustain you. Professional networking is obligatory, but your well-being is obligatory too. You need people you can relate to and whom you can be honest with. And college graduates sometimes lament that they don't have the deep conversations they did back in college about themselves and about how they relate to the world. I don't think people grow out of these conversations, and instead I think the problem is making the right kinds of personal connections becomes difficult, and people have difficulty finding the time to cultivate them. The difficulty is real, but if you sometimes overcome it, you'll feel more at peace with yourself and more confident about how you relate to the world around you. This brings me to the conclusion of what I plan to say. I tend to be brief on conclusions, so I'll make this brief. I'm also aware that I'm on the critical path to lunch. So for those of you exiting the academic world, this might be your last free food for a while, and I hope you enjoy it. For those of you continuing onward in academia, I wish you good hunting in your quest for free food. Wherever you go, may your future department's events continue to be well catered. Jim and the faculty, thanks so much for inviting me to speak, and congratulations again to all of you graduates.